This is day 2 of the Oregon Water Resources Commission meeting. I apologize for the late start. We were due to start at 8 o'clock this morning, but we had some technical challenges which have been resolved. Today is June 16th, and as you might have seen from the agenda, we have, the first item was project implementation, but that item was presented yesterday. So we're going straight into well construction proposed rule adoption. But before we do that, let's just do a quick introduction at the table. Maybe Doug, start with you. We'll just go around the table and say who we are, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Doug Woodcock, Acting Director for Water Resources Program.
Kathy Quijera, East Side at Large.
Jamal, West Central.
Meg Reeves, West Side at Large.
Good morning, Eric Clemens, North Central Region.
Good morning, Julie Smitherman, Southwest Region.
Good morning, Jan Lee Weinberg, Northwest.
Excellent. All right. So welcome to those of you otherwise physically present or on recording the Zoom or YouTube. I'm not sure. Both. Okay, got it. Thank you. All right. So Chris, are you ready for? Oh, and Laura, both of you will be presenting. Please join us. Oh. That's right. All right. I should have read my
It's not on there.
Oh, okay.
Let him listen to it.
We're throwing all kinds of.
Yes.
curveballs.
It's trying to
Yeah,
keep me on
way
my
too much
toes,
fun.
but I keep standing down.
All right. Good morning, Chair Reeves, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Annette Leben. I'm the Technical Services Division Administrator. The well construction program is within the Technical Services Division, and I am one of the 3 people who work with the Rules Advisory Committee on the rules that you'll be considering this morning. And I am going to hand it over to Chris Bird, our well construction section manager, and I'll let Chris and Laura introduce themselves and then a presentation for you.
Good morning, Chair Reeves, Commissioners. Chris Bird, Manager of the Well Construction Section. And we're here to talk to you about item H today, the well construction proposed rule adoption. This has been a long time coming for us. So we're kind of excited to get through these. These will incorporate several bills that we'll talk about through rulemaking. Again, I'm Chris Bird, Manager of the Well Construction Section, here with
Laura Hart, Water Policy Analyst and the Rules Coordinator for this particular rulemaking. So good morning.
So we'll get started. So the first thing I'm going to talk about briefly is kind of a program overview, so we can kind of see where some of these changes fit into the program. I think this might be helpful as just kind of a primer. So the well construction section handles well constructor licensing, which includes trainee cards and things like that. Start cards, well reports. We do special standards. I'm going to talk a little more in depth about these items in the beginning here as well. So exempt use registration for exempt use wells, well construction and well construction compliance. I'm highlighting those because those are, each one of these has some changes from the bills that are going to be incorporated. So as far as the licensing goes, we proctor the exams, so we give them. We verify a driller's experience. And the reason why verify experience is kind of highlighted in the slide is because that piece is affected by these rule changes. And you'll see that throughout the beginning slides. We issue licenses. Licenses are good for 2 years. And some expire in alternating years. So we handle those, some years there's more renewals than others. And we have approximately 403 licensed drillers in the state. That's bonded and unbonded. We handle the start cards, which are submitted by drillers notifying us when they're going to begin construction of a well. Currently, those can be submitted anytime before the well is constructed. A driller could be on a site with his hand on the drilling machine, on his phone, submit it electronically and start drilling and be done that day before an inspector would maybe even see that the start has been submitted. So it's sometimes difficult for us to be on site during the actual construction because these can be constructed in a day in some cases. They allow the department to inspect work. That's the intent, so we can be there during the construction. And currently, star cards don't expire. So we have over 10,000, I think, right now in our database that have been submitted over the years that are not expired. And so that's one thing that is going to be addressed in the bill, as well as this fact that they're submitted any time before work begins. Those are going to be affected. Because you can imagine, with over 10,000 open star cards, we would have to watch all those properties because they could drill any time after they submit that star card. And we would have no idea. Well reports. So drillers have to submit a well report within 30 days of construction. And that tells us how they actually built the well, materials, time it took, how much water produced, temperature, landowners information, as far as tax lot ownership information and location of the well. Currently, no map is required for water wells. GPS location is not required, which means, a GPS could get you within feet of where a well's located. And so that would be valuable information. And then helpers are not required to be listed. And that would help us so that we would be able to track, as far as the experience for someone getting licensed, how many wells they've actually worked on. And those three things, the map, the GPS location, and the helpers are going to be affected by this rulemaking. And then special standards. Special standards are requested by drillers if they need to deviate from the rules. If they can't build a well according to our standards, using maybe different materials, different depths, things like that. Just anything that would not fit within our rules. The special standards require that it at least meets, it is equally protective of the resources, one that's constructed to standards, but it just may not fit exactly with our rules. And GPS location is not required on a special standard. So again, we don't have really very good location information. Some properties don't really have an address. They may be out in the middle of nowhere. So it's oftentimes hard to locate some of these properties. And they also don't require detailed setback information unless they're putting something close to a drain field or something like that where we need that specific information. And they're also not required to tell us any associated well reports, which is helpful, especially if it's a water right well or something like that. We would like to know because there may be specific location information or construction information that would be helpful for us to know. We get approximately 300 to 400 of those a year. In the exempt use registration, these are exempt use wells that are constructed. Prior to House Bill 2145, they were submitted by landowners. After the well is constructed, the department would send an invoice within 30 days of us getting well report. And then the landowner was also required to send in a map showing us where on their property the well is located. The accuracy of the maps have always been a problem. Landowners might not either know where the well is. Some people don't live on their property, maybe vacation property or something, they live out of state, so they may not be aware. Compliance has been, is difficult. We'd sometimes have to send people to collections because we pay the bills. It took a lot of time to track that payment information and maps. Maps was a very big problem. Getting people to send them in. Some people would send in the fee, but not the map. And the map to us is very valuable, showing us where the wells are, where they're located. And we do 3,400 or so approximately of those a year. And then finally, we do well construction compliance. And that just means that we make sure drillers are constructing wells to standard. We always see voluntary compliance. We have a very good record with the drilling community. They're professionals. They like to make sure things are done properly as well. And then we have some enforcement tools available if needed to seek compliance if they aren't voluntarily complying. And then notices of violation. They have to be sent out within 5 days of confirmation of a violation by the department. And sometimes it's difficult to meet that 5-day timeline. Notices violation aren't sent out to drillers. That's if a landowner is doing something, drilling a well illegally without a permit. If they damage a well and they won't fix it, things like that. That's when the notice violation kicks in for the well construction program. And it does happen. And sometimes that 5 days is difficult to meet. It's 5 calendar days. A good example would be this weekend when we have a 3-day weekend. You have to be very fast to get that out and make sure that the notice violation is legally defensible and that all the rule citations and signatures are accurate and location information, ownership information, everything else. So the House Bill 4061 changed the 5 days to 10 business days. And so we're just aligning the rules with the statute, going from 5 calendar days to 10 business days. And then I just wanted to highlight a couple of pieces of terminology that we use in well construction. You may already know this, but that'd be helpful to include. Annular seals, it's going to be brought up during the rule making discussion today. I just want to make sure everyone is aware of what it was. The annular seal is, you can see it in the picture there, the arrow. It just prevents a loss of artesian pressure, contamination or waste, and commingling. It's a watertight seal between the casing and the land surface that prevents inflow of surface water and the commingling of aquifers, things like that. That's one of the most important parts of well construction. And when the department doesn't know when that's being placed, then we can't really be there to observe it. And this rulemaking, that House Bill 2145 gave us the ability to request notification when to place that seal. So we'll be talking about that, and that's so we can be on site during that piece. Then welded casing joints is also in the rulemaking, in that in order to get a license, drillers are going to have to prove proficiency of welding. And that was a big discussion during the rulemaking with the RAC. We feel it's important because casing comes in 20-foot lengths typically. And if you have a 1,000-foot well, that's 50 welded joints, and any one of those fails. If you have a well that's 980 feet below land surface and it's leaking or bad weld, it's you can't really fix that. You may lose the whole well. So we just need to make sure people are good at that skill and that they have proficiency. So I'll let Laura talk about the process.
And so just have a few slides for you on the rulemaking process itself. Some of this Chris has already covered, but the primary driver behind our rulemaking is we have several pieces of legislation that we need to implement. So as we've already mentioned, House Bill 2145, which we, I guess, think of as the well construction modernization bill. But then we also had House Bill 3030 and the companion Senate Bill 688, which is a piece of legislation that applies to all state agencies that issue licenses, and it requires agencies to provide an option for issuing temporary licenses to spouses of active members of the military. And it's very specific in the statute as to what criteria need to be met to provide that pathway for temporary licenses. And then also we had House Bill 4061, which is referred to as the water hauling legislation. And there's that component in there that Chris already mentioned about extending the timeline for issuing notice of violation once the department is aware of that violation. But then in addition to implementing legislation, we had some housekeeping things that we wanted to take care of with this rulemaking. I believe the last time many of these rules were updated was back in 2016. So we had, some spelling and some grammar updates to make. We had some figures that were either outdated or maybe the resolution wasn't as good back then. And so we, were able to provide clearer maps and just more up-to-date information. And then some of the statutory references needed updating as well. In addition to that, we wanted to align penalties because currently in the rules, we've got different penalty levels for well constructors and other than well constructors. So we wanted to align those penalties. And then there was a rule that was deleted as best we could tell due to clerical error, probably back in 2016. And so we just wanted to restore that rule. Made no changes to it. It's just the same language, but there's also a figure associated with that and content that the drillers need to be aware of when they sit for their exams. So a little bit about the timeline. We formed a rules advisory committee. We had about 20 members on it. We held 4 hybrid meetings. Those hybrid meetings were well attended. We had probably as many people in person as online. It's very active, a lot of good discussion. We had members from the drilling industry. We had travel representation. We had environmental groups. We had consultants as well. We did reach out to the military folks who were present at the 2019. There was one RAC meeting held for the House Bill 3030 and Senate Bill 688. I think there were like 5 members. They had one RAC meeting back then. We did reach back out to those folks, and because of scheduling conflicts or promotions or retirement, they weren't available. We did also reach out to there was a lobbyist that represented military folks, and she conveyed to us that she basically trusted in what we were doing and appreciated being kept in the loop. So we did make the effort to include the military folks in this rulemaking as well. We had a 30-day public comment period, and we held one hybrid public hearing. And we got, I guess, 3 written comments during the public comment period, and we had one joint oral comment during the public hearing. Let's see. We also presented to the Groundwater Advisory Committee to get their input during the process. I think we presented to them 3 times, once actually during the public comment period itself. We shared the draft rules with them. We had one member of that committee serve on the RAC. Floyd Sipple was on our RAC. And then during that public comment period, they did provide one recommendation through a motion to us, which I'll talk about in a second here. Okay, so there's kind of a lot of information on here, and I'll try to navigate through this with y'all. But so like I said, we got the 3 written comments and one joint oral comment, and those comments fell into 2 primary areas. So one set of comments was really focused on the issue of day of notification for drilling and seal placement. And the other set of comments really focused on the welding proficiency requirements. So with respect to the day of notification, we had one written comment that suggested that the inclusion of the snail mail or the U.S. Postal Service option was sort of outdated and maybe not in keeping with the modernization and intention of House Bill 2145. And we decided we would retain that option just because there are some folks that still don't have, great internet service and just prefer to do business through the U.S. mail. And it's just an option, so it's more inclusive to keep it in there. So we're going to retain that. We also got some comments from folks that had concerns about satisfying the day of notification requirements when they're working in remote areas because of less than ideal internet service, and maybe having issues trying to log in, send an email, or upload information online. And they asked if we could add a texting or voicemail option. And we talked about that as well, but the issue with texting and voicemail is that it's difficult to have an accurate date and time stamp because sometimes those texts come in hours later, or even days later. And we really would need to have, in terms of like a voicemail hotline kind of set up, we'd have to have a dedicated staff person, receiving calls and relaying information to staff out in the field. So that option did not appear to be feasible at this time. The motion that we received from the Groundwater Advisory Committee just urged the department to continue to explore, different ways to assist drillers that are working out in remote areas. So that's sort of the comments on day of notification. And then with respect to welding proficiency requirements, and this is probably where we got most of the input. There were concerns about having those proficiency requirements apply to both water supply wells and monitoring wells, and a request to remove the welding proficiency requirements from those that are seeking that monitoring well drilling endorsement. And as we explained during our RAC meetings, House Bill 2145 doesn't make a distinction between the types of endorsements. It's basically if you're getting a drilling license, regardless of the type of well you're drilling, you have to meet welding proficiency requirements. So several drillers pointed out that most monitoring wells don't require that level of proficiency to install that type of well. And so requested that we remove the requirements. But again, we were limited in our ability to do that by House Bill 2145. Currently, there is legislation. It's in the Senate, and it's on the docket to be heard actually today. But there's House Bill 3343A that's made it through the House. It's with the Senate. If that piece of legislation passes and is adopted, that legislation would give the department the discretion to set different welding proficiency requirements based on the well type. But currently, it's just in the Senate, so that piece of legislation is not in effect, and so that's why we're not bringing rules to you today that incorporates that discretion, because we just don't have it yet. And then the other comments that we received about the welding proficiency requirements, those came from one of our RAC members from Klamath Community College, from their welding program there. And he felt that we really needed to include professional welding standards as evidence of proficiency. So our rules included things like a transcript from a community college, or a certification from a professional training. He felt pretty strongly that there should be professional level standards akin to what we have with the American Welding Society in that D1.1 section of their standards. And so we decided we would go ahead and just include that as one option. So if somebody does hold a certificate certifying that they have met that D1.1 standard from the American Welding Society, we would view that as evidence of welding proficiency. This is back to Chris.
Right, like Laura mentioned, the House Bill 3343A is at the legislature now. So if it passes, don't be surprised if we come back to you again with a small rulemaking to talk about adding some sort of different standard for monitoring wells. All right, so I'll talk about the proposed rules now that we've come up with. I'll first talk about the problem that we're trying to solve with the change, and then the change, basically. So as far as licensing welding proficiency, like I talked about in the beginning, wells with poor welds can become a source of contamination, commingling, cause loss of artesian pressure. Steel casing can pull apart at a bad weld. If they're drilling a well, you can have water come through, shooting across through a weld, bad weld. We've seen welds, you just can see daylight through if it's above land surface and things like that. It's just a real danger. And so House Bill 2145 gave us the authority to add the welding proficiency requirement for new well drilling licenses. And that way only qualified individuals can drill wells. This isn't retroactive, so if someone's already licensed, they don't have to meet the standards. It's only if they're getting a new license. And if someone has a water well license, they want like a monitoring well endorsement, they don't have to prove again the proficiency. They just have to do it for once for the license. So that should address that problem. The temporary authorization, this is for the spouses of military members who want to get licensed to drill wells in Oregon. We've created a separate license for those individuals. It's called a temporary authorization license. It's going to be valid for 2 years. If they're licensed in another state and they come to Oregon, they would still have to pass the test. They'd have to pay a license fee, pay the exam fee, and then just provide us evidence that they're in good standing in the other state. The license is still active. We communicate with the other state just to make sure that everything is, that there's no issue to be concerned about. But then they would be issued the license for 2 years. The license could not be extended. It's only good for 2 years or until the military spouse's active duty service in the state ends. If they wanted to get a license after that, a regular license, they would be able to do that. They just have to meet the other qualifications.
Chris, can we ask questions while you're?
Absolutely, please.
On this item, this is designed to address situations for people who are moving around a lot because of, okay,
Right.
I got it. I was confused at first about the
So,
thinking behind it, but now I understand.
and just to be clear, this was a 2019 bill. And we've had on our applications since 2019, a checkbox saying, if you're an active duty, spouse of an active duty military member, check here. No one has ever done that. We don't anticipate a lot of the usage of this, but it will be an option for those folks. Start cards. So what the start cards, like I mentioned, give us notification that drillers are going to begin work. Previously, they could be submitted up to the minute before they drill a well. There's a number of changes now that are going to be included based on House Bill 2145. More data that they're going to be required to tell us about, including location information and things like that. They're going to be required to give us a proposed seal placement date. And that's only proposed, so we understand it could change based on real world situation. The day of drilling notification, which they'll give us a proposed day of drilling when they submit the start card. They do that now, basically. Start card expiration date, and then is going to be in place now because, like I said before, there's thousands out there that have not expired, that have been there for years. And then mandatory e-filing that's going to go into effect in July of next year. But the changes that are really important here is that the day they actually start drilling, so these will be valid for 60 days. Start cards will be valid for 60 days only. It has to be submitted between 60 days and 72 hours before they begin drilling. So that's, that gives us 3 days there. They also have to give us notification on the day they actually begin drilling, saying, okay, I know I submitted this 58 days ago, but today is the actual day I'm going to be on site drilling. And that's so our inspectors will know, and they can plan their day if they want to be there to observe the drilling activity. And they also, like I mentioned, they're required to give us a proposed seal placement date on that start card. Now, if you're doing a 1,000-foot well, that you could be way off if you run into problems on that proposed date. So if the date changes from what they proposed on the start card, they're required to give us at least 4 hours notice that they're going to do that seal that day. And that, again, the seal is the most important part of the well construction as far as we're concerned. So that'll give us an opportunity to be there. In 4 hours, it is difficult to make it to some parts of the state in 4 hours from a region office, but We felt that was reasonable, and the drillers felt that was reasonable. These are really important changes, and we've developed online tools that are going to be available for these folks to do it just all online if they want to, or like Laura mentioned, they can submit by email to us, and they can also hand deliver it if they have the capability. The online tools are pretty slick and easy for these folks, so hopefully they'll be using that tool, because that would go directly to our inspectors, so that they'd be aware of that work.
Chris, is it which of these is the subject of the comment we got about not using the mail? Is it the day of drilling notification? I can't.
Yes,
Oh, it is?
yes, Terry, exactly. Yeah, day of drilling notification. So like I said, we created tools, online tools that they could log in and give us that notification online, and that satisfies that requirement. Drillers wanted the ability to text in, going to start drilling today, or call in on some sort of line, dedicated line, and say I'm drilling today. We don't have a staff person that could monitor that phone, all the time, because we'd have to monitor the phone line, and we'd have to notify the person, the inspector in whatever region of the state they're in, that, hey, this person called and they're going to start doing it. Plus, we'd have to track that information, right? It would have to be entered into the database, because it's mandatory that we get that seal placement notification within 4 hours if it's different than on the start card, and it's mandatory that they give us a day of drilling notification on the day they start drilling. We just don't have the staff available to do that kind of work right now, but it is something we're open to, and it will be, we're trying this out. If we feel that we could do that in the future, we have that capability to look into that.
And so it's the idea that if you're drilling, you need to mail this in time that it gets to the department before you start drilling. Okay.
Exactly. So believe it or not, some people either don't own computers, or don't trust them, or whatever. They want to communicate with us by mail. And and so even that we have the mandatory e-filing deadline coming up in July of next year, but we still carved out the ability for people to submit on paper if they want to. It would just have to be on department approved forms, and it would have to be approved by us in writing that yes, you can still submit on paper. That'll be fine. We understand some people just don't like electronics.
If you do, can you email the day of drilling notification? On the day of?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you can.
All right.
The exempt use map and recording fee. I mentioned in the beginning that this was required to be submitted by the landowner previously. We would invoice them within immediately after we got the well report, which was due within 30 days of construction. That was often difficult. We had people out of state, people didn't respond, bad addresses, LLCs that maybe, who knows, went out of business or something. It was just, we had a lot of trouble. We had to send a lot of people to collections for non-payment. We also didn't get a lot of maps, and that was a problem. And House Bill 2145 changed the requirement to where instead of the landowner submitting the map and fee, the driller would submit it at the time they submitted the well report. So we're getting much better maps. We're getting the fees paid. We're not having to send a lot of drillers to collections, thankfully. We have sent some, but not a lot. And the maps are better. Drillers know exactly where they put those wells, and most of them are good at collecting GPS points. You can get it on your phone. And so we're very happy with how that is working. So we're adding it. It's currently in statutes. We're just adding it to the rule, kind of mirroring the standards there. Now, if a landowner does drill their own well under landowner permit, then they would still be required to pay that map and submit the map and fee when they submit the well report as well. So, but for the ones drillers drill, they're required to.
Chris, if I can just add one thing to your point here. The reason this is such a big deal for the department and for the landowners as well, and that is before, the landowner would contract with a well driller who would construct the well, and then they would settle up, and the landowner would pay their $20,000 or whatever it is for the well. And then lo and behold, 30 days later, they get an invoice from the department that says you owe us $300 recording fee for this well and a map. And they are just, the landowners can just be apoplectic about that because they've already purchased the well. What is this? And so that is just, created all this unnecessary consternation in our negotiations with the industry during the bill, HB 2145. They agreed to take on the map and the recording fee. And so now it's much more seamless. It's just a much better process.
All right, civil penalties. So when we moved over the ability for drillers to submit the exempt use map and fee, there is no authority and rule to assess penalties for those that chose not to comply. But it was in statute, but it's not in rule. So we're just putting that authority in rule. It's going to be a minor violation, and we're aligning the civil penalty amounts in the rules to be in alignment with the Division 260. Division 225 and 240 for well constructors. Division 260 is for landowners. We're just aligning the penalties. Division 260, which is for landowners, had a little higher beginning civil penalty. And so we're just aligning the well constructors with that. And I have a table here I'll be showing you in a second that just kind of shows you the different fees in civil penalties. So here it kind of shows you all the way to the left there, the Division 260 rules. That's the current rules. We're not upping any kind of penalties for the landowners. Minor was $50 and a major violation was $200. And that's the floor, right? It could go higher, but that's the floor. In Division 225 and 240, a minor was $25 and a major was $50. And that could be for the same violation. And so we thought it was fair. The RAC agreed that the minor penalty and the major penalty for amounts should be equal at $50 for minor, $200 for major. So again, just aligning the penalties across divisions, not increasing it or anything like that. So. Okay. And now the notice violation time frame, like I mentioned before, the 5 days is just too short. We oftentimes have trouble meeting that deadline. And so we were happy with House Bill 4061 up the timeline to 10 days. It's more reasonable, and we feel that that's plenty of time for us to get out a notice violation, an appropriate notice violation, which is really what the whole, if we had to do an enforcement, that would, it's all based on that notice violation. So we want to make sure it's accurate. So. And then housekeeping. In order just to make sure the rules are clear and simple, easy to read for us and for everybody else, kind of modernize the language. They've been around for a long time. We wanted to make sure that we checked spelling, grammar, made sure everything was clear. We update figures. Some of them they look like they've been photocopied, 100 times. They're terrible. So we added new ones that are much cleaner. Much better resolution, and then we deleted or restored that deleted rule that was inadvertently deleted in 2016. And it's all it is pointing to a rule in statute or in Division 200 that talks about areas of the state where dedicated measuring tube is required. It's a requirement in certain areas. It's just pointing back to that if people are looking for that information and want to know where the requirements come from.
Yeah,
Lori,
okay,
handle this one.
okay. So,
Excuse
yeah.
me, Lloyd, before you move to this, I thought I heard you say when you were introducing the material that the notice of violation doesn't go to the well driller? Is that-
Correct. So
it
notice
doesn't?
is,
Oh, what?
yes, correct. I'm sorry, Chair Reeves. So the notice violation is for landowner. The drillers, we have a different process
Oh, okay.
for doing violations. No, so violation only go to landowners if there's a violation of a statute or rule.
Okay.
So,
But there is, it's not to say that there are no violations for well drillers.
oh, correct, that's
Okay.
correct. We just don't do the notice violation. That's a Division 260 rule,
Okay,
which is other than well constructors.
Okay.
Division 225 and 240 are for well constructors, and it's
Uh,
kind of a different process.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so there's just one more, this is more of a housekeeping thing, but this was something that came up after we sent the materials to you all, so I wanted to clarify another rule change that we're bringing to you, and that is we'd like to update the statutory references that are in our rule language that point to House Bill 3030 and Senate Bill 688. So currently, the formatting is uses that Oregon laws reference, and we just want to update that reference to the actual Oregon revised statute reference. Both references are valid. It's just that the Oregon revised statutory reference, that ORS reference, is the preferred convention. So we just want to make that change as well. And then just to our alternatives. So we've got 4 alternatives for the commission to consider. The first is to adopt the proposed rules as we sent out in attachment 4. So the attachment 4 that you received mirrors what went out for the proposed, the notice of proposed rulemaking that the public received, with one minor change, and that's the change that pertains to the suggestion that we received from Klamath Community College about adding that American Welding Standard D1.1 professional standard as an option for demonstrating welding proficiency. So it's what the public received with that one minor addition. That's what you received in attachment 4. And then alternative 2 would be what you received in attachment 4. So the notice of proposed rulemaking with that American Welding Standard option added, as well as the changes to the references, updating from the Oregon laws reference to the ORS, or Oregon revised statutory reference. So that would be alternative 2. And then, as always, there's the option of adopting some other modification of our proposed rules, or to just not adopt the rules. So those are our 4 options.
And if I might, again, Annette Leva for the record, I think the reason why these rules are before you today is we have a July 1st deadline. And so that's why the legislature's non-completion of House Bill 3343 is something that we're going to have to address in the future.
so, Commissioners. Commissioner Wong.
I'm sorry, the distinction between alternative 1 and 2 is a little different from alternatives that are presented to us. Can you go back again? Typically, proposed alternative is the staff recommendation. And it seems to me that the staff recommendation would be the alternative 2. But
Yes, that's correct. And the main difference is that in the original version that was sent to you, the Oregon laws reference was included.
okay, so
And
that's-
that is now being changed to Oregon revised statutes. Same content, just different naming convention, which is the preferred naming convention.
an update since we received our
Yes.
material.
Yeah, I had the final slide here, which is the recommendation from the director's office.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
We're happy to answer any questions you might have. I know there's a lot of reading, there's hundreds of pages, and
I have a few questions, but I don't know that they have bearing on the vote. So I don't know if you want to do those before or after.
Same with you?
Yeah, I just have a curious question.
Oh, so these are not questions. People are ready to vote without yet asking questions. Okay, well, let's get a motion. Who dares to attempt this? Actually, we can just go with alternative two.
So moved. I move that we adopt modified proposed rules for ORA, OAR, chapter 690.
Second.
And continue.
Okay, thank you. As described as alternative two. on the screen. And a second was Commissioner Lee. All right. No more discussion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Kahara,
Yes.
Commissioner Mall,
Yes.
Commissioner Quince,
Yes.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Weinberg.
Yes.
All right, and Commissioner Reeves says yes. The rules are adopted. Thank you so much. But let's hear what people's follow-up.
So I just had a question about the difference between the monitoring wells and other wells, and just curious, are there well drillers that only drill monitoring wells?
Yes,
Okay,
there's like 100 bonded drillers in the state that drill monitoring wells only.
okay, that's interesting, thank you.
Sure.
And we did hear during the Rules Advisory Committee process that monitoring wells almost never involve welding.
Yeah,
And so while we would generally agree with the comments we received, we don't currently have the authority to make that change.
Oh, and that's the change that might happen.
that might.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was one of my
Oh,
questions as well. I wanted to expand upon it because one of the most fascinating things in the background was table 200-1. No, page 18, it looks like 17, 18. I had never heard of so many of these things and was curious, especially given the opposition potentially to the standards. Why wouldn't we always want highest and best standard regardless, and considering all of these different, the potential, the risks of failure for a drinking water well versus failure for a geotechnical hole or these others, I thought. So similar sort of question to of the 403 licensed well drillers in the state, about 100 are just monitoring well
Correct,
drillers.
yes.
The others,
Or water supply well. And some have both.
and these other things, the geotechnical and the piezometer and there are, one would assume, not being in that world, that if you were developed expertise and invested in the capital to drill holes, you would want to do all of them, but that's not the case.
Mr. Mole, that's correct. So you need experience, right, to do water supply wells or monitor wells. So if you have a monitoring well license and you want to expand into water wells, you would have to have at least, you have to meet the experience requirements. And you can't get that experience drilling water wells if you're only doing monitoring wells. So they would have to be trained by someone else doing those kinds of wells. And if we do adopt a rule change based on a future bill, that, if this bill passes, and if someone had a monitoring well license and wanted to drill water wells, they would, I assume the rules would be written in a way that they would have to prove welding proficiency to do that work. Because they wouldn't necessarily need it for monitoring wells if we make that rule change, but they would need it for water wells. So they would have to meet the requirements for welding.
And
So welding for monitoring wells, the casings are normally screwed together. They're not welded. And it's PVC typically.
okay.
And so they don't do a lot of welding.
And so what's happening in the labor market are for with 4,600 received a year, is that request going up? In Bases like for groundwater discussion, things that would, is there a race now? And we're seeing more demand for wells being drilled, and can the welding community or the drilling community keep up with it? I'm just curious about, again, this is curiosity.
Yeah, so Commissioner Mole, there's a backlog. Drillers are way back. I mean, it could be a couple of years really. Some people are on the list to get well drilled. They try and take care of water emergencies, people that are out of water quickly. But a lot of people are waiting on the list a long time to get a well drilled, unfortunately. Or to get the well deepened in some parts of the state where, Klamath area, Deschutes, but certain other areas where wells are going dry. Drillers try and help those people out if they can and get there as quickly as they can, but still there's just more people needing wells than there are well drillers.
And Commissioner Moll, to your question, we worked closely with the governor's office and Klamath Community College to stand up a well drilling training program at that community college because of the water well drilling needs in that particular area.
Great. So last question is on the flip side, we heard yesterday about some of the difficulty of well abandonment, repair, those sorts of things. And similarly is the the demand that we might have for correction of wells that need to be abandoned. Are those being attended to, similarly backlogged? Even though,
I don't know the answer with regard to abandonments and whether or not they're backlogged. I know that people who are not, whose wells are dry or underperforming are having to wait quite some time, even though, as Chris mentioned, they are being prioritized by well drillers. There is still, some in Klamath have been waiting now for 2 years and are still on the list with a well driller to have their well deepened. But if you'd like, I'm happy to check with the WARF program to get us an assessment of where we are with abandonments. Because I understand your question in particular to abandonments.
based on what we were talking about yesterday.
So my understanding of the well abandonment repair and replacement fund is that at the time that they are being funded to get a new well, there is also an expectation that their old well is abandoned. And so my assumption that I will confirm this is that the same professional would be doing both for them.
Behind the question is simply just having a context for when we hear from landowners or others who are express concern about their interest not being served. Is that a relatively small number of people? Is it systemic? That's where it comes from. So thanks, appreciate it. Good morning, my question.
Thanks to all three of you for the presentation and the work behind it. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a break until 9:30. And then we'll be.
Left.
You ready? All right. We are back in session, and our next agenda item is agenda item I, excuse me, follow up on commission discussion of the commission's role. Doug, I think you're gonna start us
Good,
off.
I can start us off. We do not have a presentation here today. This is a conversation that is a carryover from our last meeting in February, where during the commission meeting, several commissioners raised the various ideas about how the commission might operate in the future. And some of the things that were brought forth were taking a more active leadership role, being more involved in some of these critical water issues that are before us. Perhaps there's a need to have more frequent meetings, meeting every other month rather than quarterly to accommodate. And we didn't have time to really dive into this issue at that meeting. And so these are some worthwhile conversation or worthwhile issues for the commissioners to dive into. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity here to have a conversation amongst the commission here. This is the commission's discussion. This is not the department driving this one. So we made about 45 minutes here that we can introduce this, and we'll likely just be scratching the surface on this. I think there's a lot to talk about here. So this could be something that we pick up at a future meeting, perhaps a retreat. And so with that, Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Doug. I would like to, if we can, at least use some of the time today to talk about what gap we're trying to address, rather than going to the mechanics of how we do that. And I'd like to hear from commissioners who expressed an interest in doing things differently at the last meeting, to just kind of get at, is there I guess maybe pulling back from the how we would engage differently to what would be the goals? What are we not doing now that commissioners would like us to be doing? So I guess I would just throw it open and for conversation about that.
If I may, one other point I wanted to make, and I failed to do so, and that is from the department's perspective, since we're the ones who set these meetings up and we put the initial agendas together, we very much have an interest in hearing from each of the commissioners as to how you would like to be engaged in this. So we can help you to make this a more meaningful experience as commissioners and a commission altogether.
We had a recent example of that. Ivan talked with those of us who wanted to hear more about the Division 10 rulemaking. So we had a very in-depth conversation with him. And when major issues like that come up, it may be helpful for there to be some setup, maybe where there's not a quorum, to have those kind of discussions. So we're more prepared and we don't gloss over too much what we're dealing with at the meeting.
So that concern would be not feeling sufficiently prepared for an action item.
Right.
And that's one of the ways we could address that.
Right.
Is,
There's not always time to have the in-depth questions and conversation.
any other- Are there other, I recall that the conversation kind of arose out of, it was, we had a presentation about the regional, state-supported regional water planning task force. And I think there was some observation that essentially we all know what the problem is, and we could, I felt like it was that kind of prompted people to be thinking we could do more about this. But it was a kind of an amorphous this, at least in my head. I wasn't kind of clear. I'm trying to get more clarity about what is the gap. And, What are we not doing? Because, I mean, as chair, I kind of feel some responsibility to be getting in front of you what you want to have in front of you, basically. So,
I think Jan really hit on the main core, is that we want to feel sufficiently prepared and
Okay.
understanding of the issues going into the meeting, because these are big decisions, and the whole state is relying on us to make these big decisions, and we want to feel like we're fully prepared and are making the right decisions.
so, one of the other suggestions that was in the staff report related to, potentially related to that, was individual commissioners. I don't think being a member of the RAC, but monitoring rulemaking. Now, that doesn't inform every commissioner fully, but it allows somebody on the team to be able to help other commissioners as we talk about the agenda items. So that's one.
And others of us could listen to RAC meetings
Right,
so that we have a chance to be more informed. Otherwise, RAC members have a bigger role than the commission members.
And what Ivan did for the Division 10 rules, we have done that a few times in the past. For other, I don't know if they were all rulemakings or some hearings, I'm not sure, I can't remember, but I know we've done it before. Oh, I know, the program, the funding, the grants and loans program, I think that Kim did one of those kind of overviews. And, yeah. So, we do have some precedent for that.
Yeah, we have done that previously, very complicated rulemakings. It's just really helpful to have one-on-ones or two-on-ones with commissioners, just to be able to lay out why we're doing, what we're trying to solve, and stepping through the rules and being able to address any questions such that when it comes time for the commission meeting itself, you have a more elevated conversation at that point because you've had a grounding in the rules already. So we found those to be very helpful. Happy to do those whenever the commission would like to do that. We'll make the room for those.
Especially in particular when we're voting and we're needing to vote on something. Yeah. And are there any meetings that occur that commission members should not be attending? Are we allowed to attend all meetings that are advertised?
There is no preclusion that I can think of listening in on meetings. There's a complication about being a commissioner, just from how it is that you are representing your role. You can be there and represent that you are a commissioner, but you're there as a citizen.
I see.
You can't represent the commission itself unless there's actually been a vote taken amongst the group that, establishes the commission position. And then also we work for the governor. And so we work closely with the governor's office on various things. And we would want to make sure that whatever representation is being made is consistent with the governor's position as well. So that's why I say it's a little complicated,
Yeah.
but there is nothing to prevent you from attending a meeting and
So that's-
listening in.
Okay.
So listen, but don't speak.
What about
Just help us.
in local community meetings and meetings that are happening in our regions? That we may not have get the invite to.
Crash the party.
Do we crash that party? Or, are we stepping over any lines by attending those?
I don't think if you're not representing yourself as being there on behalf of the commission, I don't think that
I
there's.
can be just a community member attending.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You will be, some may perceive you as
Well, that's-
representing the commission. So I
Yes.
think you want to be clear in communication there.
I'm not here to represent the commission. However, I'm here to listen.
but I am a commission member.
But I am a commission member.
I think that's important that people hear.
Okay.
And that's the conundrum I see on this whole thing is the structure of Oregon's unique commission structure. It's not really a board in the sense that a nonprofit board has fiduciary responsibility and thus has to make the final decisions, but there is rulemaking authority. And yet, as with a board, the more you want the board to be engaged, the more staff work has to happen. And I don't, especially given the situation we're in, I don't think you want to overburden staff with, hey, give us more of your time, more of your logistic expertise, unless there's real value added with that question. So what are we trying to do? And I think some of the other places this has come up has been around the perceived expressed lack of coordination across agencies. Remember we talked about, could we get the agency commissions and boards together just for some retreat like big picture thinking? And at one point there was going to be, well, maybe the chair and
yeah.
the director would meet with the chair and the director, something like that. So there's that. And I think that still continues, and it's structural. There's not a structure that encourages cross-agency work in the way that we're encouraging it in the IWRS. And then there's the other piece, which made yesterday morning such a joy, and this is really like, these are my commissioner comments for the day. The 2 hours we were able to spend on the IWRS yesterday was just really rich because it allowed us as commissioners to bring, the individual perspectives and regional perspectives we have to bear on the day-to-day work going forward. My observation is that staff rarely have time to do that because the workload of the backlogs and the new expectations and the new hirings are so heavy. And so strategic planning and strategic thinking gets compartmentalized and like, oh God, we've got to fit that in, instead of it being something that's energizing and freeing up and visionary. And so that's, I really don't know what the history of why Oregon has commissions, period, and what the thinking was. I guess it's that it was just that, well, you got to make sure that they're not just doing what they want to do and citizens have a voice. But I think the professionalism and the complexity of the issues now makes that, we can't do that. We don't have that kind of expertise. So I do feel like if there are things that we can do, including the structure of the meetings themselves, the commission meetings themselves, that have more like the 2 hours we had yesterday morning, and fewer just sort of updates on where we are during the meeting. Updates and reading materials, I think, are great, but creating more space, whether it's in a meeting or really looking ahead and firmly building in retreat time, is how a recommendation I make. That's the gap that I.
Yeah, I think we need to be really cognizant of staff time.
Yeah.
As you said.
Yeah.
At a time in the past, the commission had retreats. I can't think of a center that's just out of Salem, but it was a 2-day retreat. There was an agenda. The public could come if they chose to. And there were very in-depth discussions on issues. That was very helpful. I attended some of those in the past.
Yeah. Silver
Before.
Fall. Is that Silver Fall? I remember some Silver Fall. But our last retreat was, I know it was in Maupin, but I don't remember what year that was.
Team was right when I came on board.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we are due
We are.
for some retreat time.
Yes, because we were trying to develop strategic, the 5 years plan. A lot of time brainstorming,
Mhm.
how to tie all that stuff together. And, getting into the philosophical end of, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we making this water department work for all Oregonians? How do we make life better on the planet for all of us? Yeah, that's more of a retreat type thing, or I think, yeah, we probably need to, okay, somewhere in the mix on a regular basis, kind of throw that in, where it's 2 hours on a special topic to brainstorm about, or whether it's a retreat, that we need to build more time for that in, but probably not increase our meeting schedules, meeting frequency, just because trying to pull all this together and make sure that, you know, staff can get things done and have some clarity about what they're trying to do and what they're coming to us for, so that we can get back what they need.
Chair Reeves, let me ask maybe a couple just follow-on questions for clarity purposes. So I'm hearing the word retreat a lot, right? And to me, a retreat is just another public meeting. It's another commission meeting. And so I really want to get at what is the meat of what you think about when you think about a retreat, because the reality is that it is a public meeting, right? And it's another commission meeting from our standpoint. And so I think really, you know, what is it that you all are looking to get out of that? So that way we can incorporate those into our thinking. And is it just, I guess I just don't really understand what we're saying when we say retreat, because when all of you meet, it's always going to be a commission meeting, right? So maybe a little clarity in thinking about that. The other question I have is that what I think what I'm hearing from all of you is a desire to get in more depth on topics that are under your responsibility. And so to me, that means then, so for example, I heard there was an interest in these individual briefings, so you could had time to ask more questions and get more in the weeds, so that way you could think about it and then come to the meeting prepared. So then it makes me wonder if the way we've intended to try to do that before we bring a rulemaking to all of you, we have it scheduled, kind of a preview, scheduled the meeting before that. So then my question is, do we need to allow more time during that meeting for you all to ask questions? And do we need to get in more detail on the rules so that all of you get that opportunity to not only ask those questions and hear the responses, but if there is a need to discuss, that you could do that, because as we know, if you're deliberating, that is a public meeting, you need to do that on record, right? So I'm curious if any one of those things resonates with all of you, and also just getting more clarity on what does a retreat actually mean to you? Because I think what I'm hearing from all of you, it's not really so much about a retreat, it's more about wanting to have more time built into the schedule for some of the strategic thinking. And I think retreat is being replaced with, I want more conversations about strategic direction. And I'm not sure that's true. So that's why I want clarity over that.
To me, what a retreat would be is maybe having someone from Western States Water Council who works with various states coming up with some of the ideas going on in other areas and what we can do to change some of the things that we're doing by knowing more about what other people are doing and really thinking outside the box a little bit to deal with situations like Harney, et cetera, instead of just delving more into the same issues.
I think for me, I recognize that a retreat is a public meeting, but I think we are, what I'm hearing is interest in not action items, but more conversation, strategic conversation, I guess. It isn't, you know, that it's not necessarily an action item for us. But I do think the topic matters a lot. Like, I don't know whether commissioners are feeling like we are. I think that the way that our commission is structured, and I think this is probably true across the natural resources commissions at least, is that we are reactive. You know, we respond to what is put in front of us by staff. And do we have a problem with that? And I'm not saying that this is my position, it's more just an observation about different ways that commissions could operate. And Is that is that the concern? I mean, are we trying to get more ahead of some of the issues that are in the water world? So, yeah, I think so. You do think so? Yeah.
I think that's an interesting question and observation. Oftentimes I feel like commission meetings that we try to imagine what it's like to be a staffer. Maybe you all should all just come up to the table so we can have a bigger conversation, really. But I get the sense that the preparation of an agenda, particularly agenda where action items are on them, without maybe being aware of it, it's almost like a consent agenda preparation. That you're doing whatever you need to make sure that the staff recommendation, based on good professional judgment, doesn't run into a huge roadblock and blow up. And that works. But it puts, when I think about the kind of questions that we ask, they tend to be clarifying questions about context, clarifying questions about the work that's happened to date. Sometimes it feels a little late. It puts us in a difficult position of, if we really want to object to something or say, hey, this really concerns me, we know how troubling that becomes for department workload. And we've done it a few times. I mean, I have rejected some staff recommendations, but only twice since I've been on, not often. And I'm not saying that I don't want it, I'm not saying that the commission needs to be more powerful, to have more decision-making authority, but just to use, Raquel, your example, rather than the prior commission meeting saying, hey, this RAC work is in progress and understand it because you're going to be asked to vote on it. Maybe the previous year, and I know you do that, you do notify us that, hey, this process is starting in a year from now, just as with the IWRS and the strategic plan within 3 months of each other in 2024, they're both coming. And so the question is, how can we, now that we have that notice of action a year from now, make the most of our time together to help you? And again, that's why yesterday morning was so valuable in my mind, because it was strategic. And so I do, as I talk this through, I do think that's what I'm asking for, that we don't have the pressure of your workload. So we do have the luxury of being able to step back and think more broadly about the implications of some of this stuff. But the more compressed that is between the time that's presented to us and the time we're being asked to make a decision, the less valuable I think that is from a conversation standpoint. So maybe it's a retreat-like perspective, simply by giving, I mean, retreats really are just space and time. So the agendas on regular commission meetings that had more space and time, it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy, and I hope this doesn't come across as any sense of dissatisfaction. I just want to help. Want to help as best as we can. And it's fun too. Yesterday morning's discussion was fun and energizing, and in the face of all of the load.
More fun on the agendas.
So moved.
I also think, when I think about, is there, and I don't know, maybe I'm not enough of a visionary thinker myself, but when I try to think about what would it look like for us to be less reactive, I have a hard time seeing how that would really, I mean, other than what you're talking about, Joe, which is kind of more time, more opportunity to kind of work through the things that the department says to us, we need your input on this, or we need a decision on it, or whatever, because, I don't have the daily perspective that the department has. And so it would be hard for me. I mean, I can see, we all know that there are water issues out there that need to be addressed, but in terms of trying to, I don't see us trying to like reorient where the department's headed or anything like that. I mean, I don't even know what it would look like, honestly, to be less reactive. We'll
So
start at
the OWeb board has subcommittees, and so a lot of discussion occurs at that level. But with only 7 people, we would have a problem with subcommittees,
Right.
quorums.
Yeah. Yeah, the OLED board is big, which I think is why they operate through committees so much. Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
So a few thoughts. Well, on the retreat question, to me, a retreat is mainly a time for ideas and not so much the operational business of the organization. And in thinking about the notion that we're reactive, I think, we recognize that staff, there are issues and opportunities that emerge in the course of the workflow that won't necessarily need to be brought to us. And that's just part of reality. But I think, it makes me think of those, what do they call it, Eisenhower charts, where you have an axis of importance and urgency and low to high, and you want to spend some time on important issues that are not urgent. And so you have discussions, space to think about those. And when you say, what's that look like? I think about things like, climate variability, maybe in-stream flows, groundwater policy. Jan brought up the idea of maybe looking at what other states are doing, and we can look at how a different state might have developed their groundwater policy and how it might be different. And we don't have to solve anything in that agenda item or that discussion, but we can review it and think about how this might inform our future work. With regards to our role, I think about do we see a rate across our agendas over time, not in every single meeting, but do we see that we're addressing different classes of consumptive uses, DCMI, ag? Do we see that we're addressing in-stream flow issues? All of these are within our purview responsibilities, and they should show up on agendas over the course of our tenures. Do we see opportunities for things like environmental justice and improving equity? I think that's something that's real in parts of the state. You mentioned we work for the governor. She has very ambitious housing goals, and so that's going to take a lot of water. And so I look at that and think, well, is that a lever to try to pick up and advance the 100-year vision concept again? Because if you're going to address that housing need, they're going to need water, and they're going to need infrastructure. And we know we need both built and natural infrastructure. And I still like that 100-year vision concept, and I would like us to, if we could help carry that forward in some way that's productive and maybe make it realized, that would be, I think, a nice vehicle to help the department move from the IWRS to actual addressing some of the goals in it. That kind of program was created. And then, I think about staff time and my day job. I have to present to commissions and committees and boards, and I know how challenging that is and how much time it takes. So I want to be very respectful of that. I don't want to burden staff. They've got work plans. They've got to be responsive to the legislature. But I do appreciate the notion of, like Ivan taking the time to brief commissioners. That's great. That's a additional step to help prepare people for meetings. Hopefully it isn't too burdensome. But so yeah, those are some of my thoughts on it.
Eric, I think it was you, I'm not sure, I thought it was you who at one point suggested the idea that at the beginning of each new biennium, after we get a budget, kind of having some commission staff conversation, and this could be in whatever format it takes, about what that budget tells us about the strategic direction for the biennium, and what things we, the commission, might want to prioritize within that. I thought that was a great idea. I think it came from you. I'm not really sure, but I mean, to the extent we wanted to build in a more structured strategic role for the commission, that would be something to consider.
Well, it helps manage expectations. You have to be realistic about
be kind of, yeah, and a kind of a check-in opportunity through the biennium. You know, what worked, what didn't, what were we able to get through, what were we not. It might be useful. I don't know if it would be useful to the department. I think it would be helpful to the commission to get more engaged at that level.
We know that we're going to need to put together an update on our strategic plan. I think that's due middle of next year. We have been talking about, having that conversation with the commission like we did before, perhaps in a retreat format where we can, no agenda items necessary. Let's just talk through these things, set agency priorities.
Is that update a 5-year, is there a time period associated with it?
The one that we're currently in was a 5-year. Raquel, is there any direction from the governor's office on that?
Yeah, Chair Reeves, Commissioners. I don't know if I put my name on the record yet. So Deputy Director of Strategy Administration for the department. The current guidance that is out there is 3 years. And we have flagged to them that we'll have a briefing on this, I think, at the next meeting. But we've decided to combine our DEI plan, which is another component of the governor's expectations, with our strategic plan. That is an option that they provided us. I think that's how you really can operationalize it, and make sure that you're consistently thinking about it, as opposed to DEIJ just being this separate, thing over here that is not integrated well into your strategic plan. And the only challenge that we still have to work through with DAS and the governor's office is that those ones are required to be 2 years. And so we said, so how's that going to work? And we don't have an answer on that yet. They just last week released a template of what their expectations are on strategic plans, which I can share with the commission. I will also share with the commission, it's actually, DAS has a website for all of the governor's expectations that we are working on. Most of them are due December of this year. Things like succession planning. I don't know that those are necessarily, if you all want to get into that with us, we could, but that probably sounds a little bit more operational. Director 360 reviews. I don't think they'll be requiring that for acting directors at this point in time, but at some point there will be a Director 360 review. And they've provided guidance on that. So those are some examples. Some of it is recruitments. We're required to have recruitments filled within, or offers, we should be clear about it, from opening to offer within a certain period of time. I want to say 50 days.
50 days.
And so there's a number of different expectations that are included there. The strategic plan is one of them. DEI plan is one of them. Those, of course, have the option to be combined. And we'll be talking more with you all about that. I do have maybe one question for you all is, as I listened to some of the items that may be of interest, I'm curious to hear if the structure in which we put items on the agenda is what you're looking for, because we have had folks come in from other states, and sometimes that generates a lot of conversation, sometimes that doesn't. Is it that we need to create that space and come to the commission meeting with discussion questions? Is that what helps create a more meaningful agenda item? If we're talking about, some of the things that may be coming down the line for the commission, it's really just a briefing about topics. Does it help to have discussion questions to come forward, or what really makes it the difference between us, just coming and briefing you, and what makes it a more meaningful conversation? So I'm curious to hear maybe a little bit more about that as well, from all of you.
I think discussion, having the time for actual discussion is important for making it meaningful, more meaningful for the commission, for us to give kind of input, insight, perspective that hopefully helps in what staff are doing or kind of pointing a direction maybe is to focus, all of the, some of the ongoing priorities of the department. I find it helpful, like, okay, these are things that the staff is curious about what we think about X, Y, Z, rather than, okay, here's an information dump. Okay, that's great. I'm glad to have that, but it doesn't give us a chance to kind of feel our way through it. What does this mean? How does this work? And does that provide any insight or help to staff as they're trying to get stuff done?
Thank you. That's really interesting because I think we have gravitated towards this model of, okay, we have a limited time sitting before the commission and we know that these things are coming in the future. Let's make sure that we're giving them briefings ahead of time so they are at least exposed to this. So when it comes time to make a decision, take an action item, it's not the first time that you've heard it. And so I would be very interested in understanding how we could make that more of a discussion rather than just a data dump or an information dump.
I do think that one dynamic is that when something comes to us and we need a decision, we don't tend to have the same kind of freewheeling conversation about it because although it has happened a couple times, as Joe suggested, none of us wants to be presented with a decision and then say, we're not ready to make a decision. And in some cases, we don't really have the latitude to do that. But I know you've attempted to address that by having the item presented to us in earlier meetings. And so maybe the target should be the informational kind of time when you put something in front of us, but you don't want us to do anything with it yet. And sort of having a more robust conversation at that stage. I mean, that'd be one method of getting at some of it. I think getting at some of that. Can we shift just for a minute to talk about the idea? I can't remember if any of this was in the staff report. We have had some conversation about a retreat soon, potentially in connection with the Burns meeting. Is that landed anywhere?
We did talk about that and we have not wrestled that one to the ground
Okay.
yet.
Right. Because I think maybe some of this really would be an appropriate topic in a retreat. Using the retreat to talk about, among other things, how we want to use retreats going forward. But so maybe what we should do is just take this information, work on trying to schedule something, and then taking this up and to try to get to a more comfort level for everyone in terms of what our going forward strategy would be for the way we operate as a board, as a commission. What do you think? Does that make sense?
The only thing that, yes, it does. At the same time, I don't know that it addresses the question fundamentally of, is it helping you do your work? Is any of this, I mean, it's presumptuous to say much of what I've said, that my perception is that the staff just don't have the time and the bandwidth and the encouragement to step back and really think about in the upper right quadrant, the strategic but not urgent questions, because there's such a flurry of stuff to do. Is any of this, did you see any of this as a path to helping you do your work success and feel satisfied about it and productive?
I do. I think these conversations are great and we want to continue to encourage these conversations where there's no agenda item here. There's no action item that the clock is ticking. It's just helping us understand how we want to move forward strategically. where I think staff are gonna struggle a little bit here is this dichotomy between, don't just bring us stuff to hear about, versus how is it that we present that in a manner that it's meaningful and it is advancing this strategic conversation moving forward. So Joe, you had presented, Commissioner Mall, you had presented the idea of bring things to us earlier and let's start thinking about them strategically. So it just becomes part of our overall conversation moving forward. And certainly open to that. We just need to figure out how we do that, that it doesn't just become one of those other items that is taking up commission time and isn't useful.
Well, and I also, I mean, I think that I wasn't suggesting that we go forward with any of this yet, because I think my idea was in a retreat setting, we would try to come to more concrete, a place where it was clear to staff what we were hoping. It was, well, we understand what are we trying to achieve here. I still think we need more work on that. More clarity of thinking. And then a frank conversation with the staff about what helps them, what is going to be an added burden. If we feel strongly enough about something, maybe, and it is an added burden, then maybe we need to have some conversation about whether that added burden can work. But really, I guess I'm kind of suggesting we punt this. We started thinking about it. I would like, it would be good if we could get a better fix on our own thinking about, well, I think we definitely want to have a better understanding before we're asked to act. And that's probably like the clearest goal I've heard out of this conversation.
Chair Reeves,
Yes.
if I may, so a couple of things just for folks to think about. So I know I'm putting some tactics in front of you and that's what we're not trying to address right now, but just some considerations for you all as you go home and are thinking about this, since we'll have it sounds like a future conversation, is so the role of the commission, right, is to provide policy direction, right? And that's why rulemaking is one of your critical functions. That is policy. That is also why, we talk about legislative concepts. I'm a firm believer that budget is policy, by the way. And that is also why we bring the budget proposals to all of you. And that's on the front end before, the agency request budget is published. We have a conversation about that. There's probably some things that we can do to facilitate more engagement with you all on those items earlier in the process. So I don't know if that is something you are interested in, but in terms of strategic direction for the agency, budget and the budget requests that we have is critical to being able to have the capacity to drive forward a lot of the things that you all are interested in. So I think we could get into some of those conversations with you all if there's an interest in revising how we do in-stream flows, for example, right? That's going to become a budget question, right? Because a lot of things we're not doing today, it's because we don't have the resources to do it. So, or if we are going to prioritize it, it means we're not going to do something else. Storage, I know, is another one that keeps, coming up that's of interest. If we want to do more work around that, we have to find the capacity to do it. So I think that there's ways that we can integrate those conversations. And part of this, I think, then goes back to this question of the strategic plan, because that's where we will be setting priorities. And that's why I think it'll be critical for those conversations. And so I don't know when exactly we're going to start that. It could be the next meeting, the retreat piece of this. It could be that it's better set up for the following meeting, because we're trying to make sure that we're integrating within that workflow, the strategic plan and the IWRS work, and the timing of those, and when we'll be really queued up to have a robust conversation with you all. But those are just a couple things to think about, is that we could also talk about in terms of rulemaking, we provide you with our list of rulemakings that are kind of the short list. There is actually a list of 30-something rulemakings, I believe, that need to be done, right? So one thing we haven't asked the commission to do is walk through all of those and prioritize them. We've done that at the management level. But that is another thing we could consider. Note that that list is going to get longer because pretty much everything that was passed in 2010 requires rulemaking. So we're going to have to figure out, and we've not yet gotten another rulemaking person. So those are some of the areas where you can prioritize, because it may be that we come back after session and say, okay, now we have to prioritize rulemakings that are required to be done, but what gets to go first? So those are just some things you all can think about in terms of your role, that we certainly have some robust conversations about that on the leadership team, but we could bring those into the commission forum.
2010 passed.
I don't know.
You said it passed, so I thought maybe.
No, if it passes, sorry. I don't know that it's passed this one.
Another breaking news.
Yes. So one thing that I see is that there's a lot more interaction with the stakeholders than with us. So there was this big forum where everyone participated in, I forget what it's called, didn't really come to much fruition, but if we had had the same kind of opportunity to participate, it would have been helpful. And the stakeholders have discussions on the budget and on legislation, very in-depth compared to what we have. And I think if it wasn't incompatible for us to be a part of some of those discussions, it would be of great value.
Chair Reeves, commissioners, you can always be a part of conversations. However, as we talked about at the beginning, if you can't go there and say, I'm representing the commission, you can't speak for the entire commission. The authority of the commission is vested in the body, not in the individual. So that's why we're always making that distinction, right? And so you have to be clear that these are your individual views as a commissioner and not the commission's views on things, unless you all have voted on it. So that's one thing. If we then have a number of commissioners, we meet the quorum, then that is a commission meeting at that point in time, and we have to proceed in that manner.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going back to the environmental justice issue and thinking about, we sometimes have presentations that involve staff from other state departments. So like I would be interested in the DEQ presentation on nitrate contamination as well as color basin, right? And that's a different, they're going to address water quality aspect, but at some point I expect that issue or something like it somewhere else in the state is going to come before us in some way. And so seeing that from their perspective, it would help us integrate across departments, across these issues, and it would help us be thinking about something that might be coming to us in the future. And it's staff from other departments get to do the report instead of staff from other
Well, that
That's
reminds me,
that's
of the request that you made, Joe, about the big events. If they move north, are we ready? And
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
we are gonna, in one of the coming meetings, I think we're gonna get some people from other, maybe federal agencies, I don't know, agencies with more,
Dam safety.
expertise on that to address that.
Chair Reeves, that will be our consultant that we've hired to
Okay.
do that will come do that. If you're interested, we can certainly have the conversation with other federal agencies if you would like.
No,
that.
I was just using as an example, a commissioner saying, can we hear about this? And then you guys finding the expertise.
I'm interested in, when it comes to the dam safety, why we wouldn't also have somebody from the Corps. I think it's worth thinking about. If the topic is dam safety, what's the Corps doing now relative to that? And they look at the atmospheric rivers. That's just an aside.
I was just going to say, this fits into this umbrella of what makes this a more engaging experience for the commissioners. And that is, if you have things that you want to hear about, we would like to hear about those as well, but let's keep those in this venue of what's going to help us down the road, as opposed to just personal interest. I don't need to
Right.
say that, but
Yeah.
you know, I think there are opportunities to bring others in to present before the commission and educate all of us here.
I think about the groundwater work of the last couple of years, and that was a commission directive. What led to that? What about the context that led to that point where the commission acted and the department prioritized and has moved forward on something? I think that was a successful example of what you described, like how the commission having a role in policy. So maybe dissecting, stepping back and like, okay, what was different about that? Was it timing? Was there something in the way that it was presented to us? Like, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it does stand out.
I think it was the presentation about areas of significant concern with the specification that it didn't affect allocation of water. And us saying, why not?
Why not? Yeah, so that context, I think, and so that's why, again, rather than the previous meeting, getting, sometimes I think that we're, again, because the point of action is on a rule change or something like that, and we don't have enough time or heads up on the context. What's the problem? We're often presented with, hey, here's the solution, and here's how we got to the solution. But what's fundamentally the problem? And the place where we do define the problems is in the IWRS and in the strategic plan. That's the place where it's called out. So in my mind, us staying at that higher level and giving you all a chance to pause and remind yourselves and us, what's the problem? What are we trying to address here? It's not just this scrivener's error or this update that's needed. The problem is we're running out of water, or the redistribution is bad, or there are some communities that simply have no access to it. So maybe that would be another thing for us to, yeah, I did, it's strategic planning.
Julie, you had a comment too.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention it as it relates to the IWRS and looking at climate change and how that's impacting supplies. That perhaps we have presentations also from state climatologists, get more in depth on those issues as a group. I know we all have an understanding of how climate change is impacting water supplies. However, it'd be good for us to all hear it together in this forum and then have a discussion about it.
More people are probably, as
Up
an
against,
example,
yes.
places like Lebanon states.
And then other states are doing exactly.
Tribes.
And tribes, yeah. So giving us those opportunities to think about those larger issues and things that are at the forefront of the decisions that we're going to be making over the next several years. I also had another question. Is there a way to access the previous PowerPoint presentations from staff? That's
From other meetings?
from past meetings.
Yes,
Yeah.
all of our PowerPoint presentations are available online.
Okay,
Are they on the
We can show you.
website where the commission stuff is?
Yes.
Okay.
Reading materials.
All right.
Website. I don't recall which folder it's in, but it's
go soon.
the presentations, the agendas, and everything are all available.
So even the PowerPoint itself that is presented.
Yeah, it'll be a PDF of the.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I don't have to keep bothering staff or asking them to send me one. No, thank you.
You're never alone.
And part of it is just understanding where we can find these
We're
things.
bothered
So
sometimes, we gotta be.
That's
bothered
what
sometimes.
I'm sure we are sometimes a
Well,
bother.
okay, okay.
You, for you.
Right.
I'll be a bother again, as I think about, all right, what have we brought up in these things repeatedly that we, unlike the clear forward motion on groundwater, still seems to be so that, hey, what about this, what about this? And it's the land use nexus. I really don't feel like we've had the chance in space to really explore this vast generalization, which I'm always making, that we're missing out by not being better connected and collaborative with DLCD and the land use discussions. And that's a big statement, and I don't know, I can point to particular experiences that I've had in my work where I see this. But what I feel like we would all benefit from is the time with, where are you, Brenda? Come on back and visit and let's talk about it. Maybe it's not the issue that we're proposing that it is. I think we need to test that, and that's perhaps the kind of thing that we could explore in a relative to the IWS and a strategic planning session.
You know, maybe we should look at those that at a retreat, you know, come up with a list of topics that we want to see, like land use nexus, like the climate variability. And we had presentations even from other organizations or individuals, and when we have the discipline to try to relate it to the IWRS, right, that topic. That gives us the space and time, and we might evaluate like how realistic is it for us to, for the staff and with their workload to bring this issue before it's in the coming biennium or something for the next year. Or when is it better? You know, so it just might be a longer term on that topic, but having a retreat where we talk specifically about questions we have might be a great way to go about it.
I agree, and tactically, Raquel, it may be a work plan element for the planning division within the director's office. It seems to sit there well, now that there are, you know, more bodies to more people work on this. Maybe it is at that level that workshop and assignments, so to speak. Does that make sense? You're looking at me like it doesn't make sense.
It's a Sherry's commissioner, in part because I didn't hear it workshopped into what?
Oh, and tactically, it's, I mean, you know, who's going to do this work? Who on the staff side can respond and sort of run with this as we develop it? And I think perhaps it fits within the bailiwick of the planning team, like Kim described yesterday, rather than, hey, everybody, the commission is looking to do this. These are planning questions, and the excitement we heard yesterday about the department having a shift in the culture, in its culture related to planning. That's certainly what I'm asking for, and so just tactically, just, you know, can the company grapple with that?
And
Yeah, yes,
Sherry's
it does.
commissioners, I don't have an answer right now. I think we need to think about, and the reason I'm reluctant is that we need to see what resources we get, because as we keep growing, we need to take that moment to say, okay, what's the roles and responsibilities, right? And it's when you're just bringing on a lot of staff, we're still in that kind of growing period of sorting through that. That is not currently necessarily what the planning section is doing. That doesn't mean that can't be. So to me, it's more of, I don't want to get to committing to a tactic quite yet.
Wasn't our
And at the same time, yeah, if it's, so we should figure out what the goal is, and then we can figure out the who and the what. So.
I asked a clarifying question, and I'm tying both Commissioner Quimp's and Commissioner Wall's conversations here. So Commissioner Quimp's talked about strategizing on some things that could be prioritized. And we'd had conversations before, but perhaps at the retreat conversation, we're following a legislative session where we understand where our budget is and what kind of resources we have, what kind of mandates we receive from the legislature, having a retreat perhaps where we can talk through that and see where other things might be able to fit in and what the priorities are. And then back to Commissioner Wall, did you pick up on that piece? And then that is what is being directed back to some group within the agency to help figure out how we sequence that moving forward.
wouldn't quite that direct. It was more just along the lines of, I mean, the category of conversation that we're having, if you wanted to summarize where this all fits, it's arguably in planning. Where do we have dedicated resources for planning? Kim's group. I mean, that's my perhaps naive understanding of how that is infused in the organization. So it was actually no more connection than that. For whom will it, who is not so burdened with the backlog that they have the encouragement and the sort of mental bandwidth to delve deeper into some of these bigger planning questions that we're talking about.
And there really is a culture shift here with time because we are receiving more resources. Historically, we have been in this mode of just having slivers of time of individuals that collectively, if we can get everything together, then we can produce something. But it's been very difficult to identify a body to take this on because.
So we're probably out of time for this conversation today. We've been talking for an hour and, which is one of the reasons that we retreat.
Yes.
But anyway, so I think we have ideas and logistically, we have to figure out when we can do a retreat. That's kind of the next step here.
To Raquel's observation that it's still a commissioners meeting, are you suggesting that we have a retreat that's different from one of our quarterly meetings?
Yes,
Additional meeting,
I
an
am,
additional
and I'm
meeting.
talking about an additional, I think I'm talking about an additional, meeting. I shouldn't say that with certainty. I guess it depends on what needs to be done. But yes, I think that's, yeah.
I think I'd suggested that, maybe it would be easier to have next to the September meeting, so hopefully there's fewer logistics for the staff to work out. That's why
Like a longer set of days.
Yeah, or even, and if it can't be done then at the November meeting, but in connection with the meeting, basically, which I think that's a good idea. Let's, September would be great. We can pull
Commissioner
it off. In for
Quimp's,
a retreat.
for
Yeah.
Commissioner Quimp's benefit, yesterday we were talking about having the September meeting in Orange.
Last
Okay.
evening, we were talking about having it at the Alvord Hot Springs.
We also talked about having it in the
Did you have a quorum?
Did that
Heard the
inform-
whispering.
No quorum. Okay, so let's, just a logistical moment here. We had a break at a different time. So we have three more, well, actually four more agenda items with the executive session, but people want to take a break now, or do we want to do like a break now?
Could use a brief break.
All right, well, let's just go ahead and let's do a brief break now. How about that? 5 minutes? All right. Come back, please, at 10:45. right, we're ready to go? We're good, okay. So we're back in session, and our next agenda item is approval of minutes. Oh, before we do that, though, I just want to let people know that we're adding an agenda item to the agenda today. Will be the last agenda item after public comment, and it's an executive session. So that's just a heads up. So can I get have all of you had an opportunity to look at the minutes? Mhm. All right, can I get a motion to approve these minutes?
I move to approve the minutes for the February 23rd and 24th, 2023 meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. And a second. Second that. All right. Commissioner Kahara,
Yes.
Commissioner Wall,
Yes.
Commissioner Cook,
Yes.
Commissioner Spindler, yes. Commissioner Weinberg, Commissioner Reeves says yes, and the minutes are approved. Thank you. So our next item is commissioner comments. And I think, how about if we just start at this end? Commissioner Weinberg, would you like to start us off?
Sure. One of the things that I found really helpful is working in groups where associations can work together. So we have a partnership called the Oregon Conservation Partnership, and that's made up of the watershed councils and the soil and water conservation districts and the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. So we had some good discussions and able to work together on projects. One of the things that we're working on now is natural climate solutions, such as carbon sequestration on natural and working lands. So we've been involved in a lot of the work behind the Climate Action Bill 3409. And we are working on a carbon sequestration website for the public and a guidebook on how people might implement that. So the benefit that has for water is that there are a lot of co-benefits from carbon sequestration. So using less water, water quality, air quality, a lot of other things. And we want to continue to do that work and share it with others and kind of broaden the partnership at some point in the future. So I am retiring from the organization at the end of this month. So I'm looking for creative ways to becoming more helpful in the future. And I was thinking when I was a board member of the National Water Resources Association, that there was so much to be learned from the other states and what they were doing. So I'm going to set off on a venture to start looking at Western States Water Council, Western Governors Association, NWRA, and other organizations to try to come up with some ideas to share on what's being done elsewhere. I don't know that that will come to fruition to provide very much, but at least it will be a good learning thing for me to do. So that's kind of where I'm at this point.
Dan, yes, so on that part of collaboration, I think that's really, really key and has become more prominent in our area in Southwest region. A lot of local groups have been engaged in water-related issues. And I see that really as a benefit. It's another opportunity for education and engagement on these important issues. And also some groups, some collaboratives, they are called, and they help promote different water efficiency programs that we have going on in the areas from different communities. They and help answer questions for those types of topics. So it's been really helpful, especially in cities that maybe can't afford to have run a conservation program, is to have a volunteer group that can help provide some of those services. Because there are people out there looking for ways to help and they don't know where to insert themselves. So it's been great to see these groups starting to form, and I want to be more of a participant in those groups as well. And so been planning to go to those meetings when I can. One of the most recent meeting, it was actually a fundraiser dinner for the Rogue River Watershed Council. And in the past several years, there were several sub watershed councils, and they've all combined into one. So it's the Rogue River Watershed Council, and a lot of collaboration there, obviously, work with several stakeholders, but we had a dinner, fundraising dinner on April 29th, and was very successful in raising funds to continue doing monitoring and restoration work along the Rogue River. Along with that, there's a group called the Rogue Drinking Water Partnership. And so those are agencies or utilities who are along the Rogue River, and they regularly meet to discuss source water protection and source water protection measures. And they've also been able to apply for grants, again, talking about bringing multiple groups together with different or multiple benefits. And because of that, they've been able to secure grants for doing a lot more work on the road. And this year, the snowpack obviously was wonderful. Very, very happy about the above average snowpack in our area. But we were 30% below average in our precipitation. And so we've seen that impact our stream flows. And then we've had kind of the rapid melt. It's been a little less rapid in the Southwest than it has been in the northern part of the state, but still we're seeing that decline very quickly. And this year, some of the main irrigation reservoirs they're not full, but we're celebrating 50%, 70%. You know, we think it might be odd, you know, to celebrate 50%, but when you're looking at going into a year, the past 3 years, going into the watering season at 3%, 50% is really great. So obviously, you know, it's not exactly where they want to be, but all the irrigation districts in our area have been working to make sure that things are running as efficiently as possible, and also communicating with customers about the situation. So Medford Water is actually building a new campus, is what we're going to call it. And with that, we want to provide education to local schools. So we have started to engage with the school district and their curriculum director to figure out ways that we can incorporate their curriculum into exhibits or ideas at the campus. So it can be a place where they can bring students to learn about the water resources in our area. And we want to invite anybody from outside the area too, and have that be a place for learning and education. And so that's still several years out, but we're starting the planning process right now. And so if anyone has any ideas on how to demonstrate or do demonstrations or exhibits, we'd love to hear some ideas. And then, you know, as Jan was talking about it, there's opportunities for these kind of nexuses. In July, there is a conference with the American Water Resources Association. There's a land and water conference in Denver, Colorado. And I think it could be really interesting bringing land and water together in focused presentations. So something that I'm interested in as well. And that I have not bought my ticket yet, but I was hoping to attend. And if I don't attend that, I plan to attend the national conference in November.
Do you know where that is?
The national conference, I believe, North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Who's the organizer of this? The one in Colorado?
American Water Resources Association. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, just. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Reeves. I'll just go quickly off the retreat topic since we spent time on that. I'll make my comments brief, but I would be interested in discussing climate variability in Oregon, maybe at least east side and west side, if not more regional. The land use and water use nexus. Thinking about future housing development with the ambitious goals in the state. in-stream flow protections and environmental justice regarding water quality and supply. I think those are all meaningful topics for the future of the state that we might consider learning about in greater detail. I think they'll have perceptions about those and can certainly learn a lot, I'm sure. It's good to see everybody in person. It's been a while since I've been here in person. I understand you had a good meeting yesterday, and I missed out on some good conversation. I also want to acknowledge, maybe we'll see people during some public comment, but I think of, we've always had regular attendees at these meetings showing interest in Oregon's water management. I think Kimberly Priestley from Water Watch, April Snell from Oregon Water Resources Congress, Claire Clog. Sometimes we have representation from the League of Women's Voters. And so I miss seeing them, and I hope we will in the future, but they were often a regular presence before COVID, and a great resource, I think, for the commission to listen to on these issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Joe, how about you?
Like Mr. Quemps, much of our previous discussion touched on some of my earlier reflections, but there was relative to the atmospheric river question that we talked about, recognizing that we'll get into that a little more in September, looking forward to it, but also recognizing that last time atmospheric rivers hit Western Oregon, it was 1964 and 1996, the big ones, and we know that those were big things, and infrastructure now has aged, and so really curious because just a little shift north and or south, and we've been square in the bullseye again this year. Really encouraged by some reports that were out just a week or two ago about work that's happened over the last 2 decades in California and Sacramento River Basin, where working with the Corps, regional municipalities and others have helped move revetments a mile away from the river and given floodplain back to the river, and being able to see that in the face of that, areas that had flooded in the past did not flood with these epic storms that they had this year. And so seeing that, giving the river back its floodplain is what green infrastructure is an example of green infrastructure. And we've touched on that. And just to see that proof of concept is something that I think we should be looking ahead, because we have in the Willamette Basin particularly, an infrastructure that is beyond its engineered lifespan, and revetments are failing currently without the big floods. And so when we do have a big flood, it's going to really redistribute things. And so it's encouraging to see that, we can really, the river can work on behalf of even communities and commerce in the traditional sense. And I just wanted to repeat, I just laud Doug and all of the staff for what you've been able to accomplish in the last 2 years to hire as many people, hire and onboard and think about retaining as many good people as you have. And to continue to do that in the face of the swirl of another legislative session and continue to keep these bigger picture planning questions in mind is just a testament to your leadership and the leadership of all of you in the room and out there. It's impressive because these are big, wicked problems and people are sticking with it every day. And so just want to say thank you for that again. Thank you. And finally, I just recommend a book. I read a book that's actually fairly old. Maybe some of you have seen it, but it's called Rising Tide. And it's the history of the 1927 flood on the Mississippi, but it gets into late 19th century approach to controlling rivers, the revetments that were built, the revetments that were subsequently blown up to save New Orleans, even though they didn't have to, how that flooded out communities, especially Black communities, how that affected the politics of the southern states, and just a fascinating read. And as you read it, you start to think about things. It wasn't that long ago. I talked about it with my mother, and she said, "Oh yeah, your grandfather was a surveyor post some of those floods." And I had no idea. So again, Rising Tides, I think it's the movie 2009, 2010. Fascinating read. So for your summer beach holiday.
Right.
Beach read.
Like,
Right.
Just a little light reading,
Right.
okay.
Kathy, how about you?
Not a whole lot to add to what others have already mentioned. Really happy with snowpack this year and the fact that it has come off slowly for the most part. Deschutes, Crooked River basins are actually, have actual water in the reservoirs, which is kind of nice. Really nice coming over the past, on Wednesday, and gee, Detroit is full. It was, been years since I've seen that. Wow, there's actual water here. This is great. Irrigation seems to be going along better this year than it has in the past 2 or 3. It was good to see that our drought conditions and, the nice big red blob in the center of the state has, lightened the tone on the drought monitor a bit, which is, a big relief, knowing that we're also really not out of the woods yet as far as drought is concerned. At least we're starting off better than we have. Not really much more to add on, retreat and thinking about bigger questions. I think this is kind of the place to start thinking and talking about what do we mean by equity. That was a lot of our discussion yesterday on, what do we mean by equity? What do you mean by that for, distribution of water? What, I think this is the place to kind of start exploring that and talking it through. If things need to change, this is where that change needs to happen. That's really all I have.
Thank you, Kathy. I wanted to talk a little bit about some stuff that OWEB has been up to that is relevant to the kinds of conversations we've had over the last yesterday and today. And so climate has been a huge OWEB focus over the last, probably 2 years, I guess. Beginning with the adoption of a climate resolution, which basically was something along the lines of that we want to infuse all of our work with awareness of and attempts to address climate issues. And now there's a rulemaking underway to try to get more specifically the climate theme into the grant writing and awarding process. Starting mostly with the grant writing process, I think part of the idea is to get grantees thinking always about climate and how their project is going to affect climate change, or climate variability. So OWEB has, we talked about this, has a committee structure because it's a big board. What I think is interesting, the three committees are water and climate is one of them. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is another one, and grants, the bread and butter of what, the core function of what OWEB does. And the fact that the staff and the board actually have done a fair amount of work around equity, equal justice, environmental justice, basically. And the committee is active, and it's kind of incremental, but it's getting to the point where many of the conversations we have as a board, and certainly in the committees, the question of DEI issues comes up. And how is this dealing with that? How is what we're talking about bringing in awareness of trying to expand, have a bigger tent, get more diverse communities involved in this. And it's almost like it really is becoming part of the daily vernacular for that agency. And it's hard to say yet exactly how that's going to translate into action, but it's really, I mean, I'm just reporting on it because I'm really happy to see it. And I think we are going to be heading there as well. This agency is going to be heading there. And so I think it'll be, maybe we can look to OM for some of that work that OM has done. The OM board has done, I think there were 3 DEI trainings with a consultant. Trying to remember this morning who the consultant was, I cannot remember, but it's very helpful work. And so maybe that'll be part of our next steps on this journey. I also just want to say that I thought yesterday's and today's conversation were, I really appreciated the staff work that went into them and the active engagement of the whole commission on a lot of stuff that we talked about. That equity conversation yesterday, when I was thinking this morning about what were we talking about yesterday, I had forgotten about that equity conversation. I'm glad you brought it up because that's an interesting question. And we're going to really have to get to the bottom of that, about what exactly do we mean in this context when we talk about water equity. So I was glad to be reminded of that. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be talking more about it. Maybe it's one of the topics we'll be talking about. So our next agenda item, we're pretty close to on time. How about that? Is water use reporting waiver request process overview.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming. Thank you, everyone.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No problem. Good morning, Chair Reeves, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Rachel Levelford. I'm the manager for the surface water hydrology team here. I know I can be a bit soft-spoken sometimes, so please feel free to ask me to speak up if I get quiet here. So, good to see you all again. I am here this morning to talk about the water use reporting waiver request process. This is an informational item. The reason I am talking with you about this is because we have received a request for a waiver of the accuracy requirement for reporting for governmental entities, and I'll get into what that means. This is a process we have not undertaken in about 25, 30 years, but is something that we'll be bringing to you all in hopefully in a few months here, and asking you to make a decision because it is up to the commission to determine whether or not these waivers can be granted. So I will go ahead and I think jump in at this point. So the purpose of this presentation, again, I want to give you a bit of grounding in what the water use requirement for governmental entities is, a little bit about the history of its development, detail the process for seeking an accuracy waiver, including the basically the factors that the commission gets to weigh when determining whether or not to grant that waiver. Go through a bit about why a governmental entity may seek a waiver and why we're having one come up now. And then also describe your role in reviewing and approving that or not the waiver in anticipation again of this waiver request from the Burton River Irrigation District. So I'll back up a level and just say that the surface water section houses our water use reporting program. As a reminder, this is user reported water use information. And there are really 4 different requirements that may trigger somebody to have to report water use to this program. Critical groundwater area, serious water management problem areas. These are, of course, really comprehensive in nature. Water right conditions, and that's really from around the mid-early 90s forward. That's been a typical condition on most new water rights. The 4th group are governmental entities, and that's what we'll really be talking about today. So in 1987, the legislature passed this statute. For the first time, this was really the first time we had water use reporting on the books for the department. They established that any governmental entity needed to annually submit water use records to the department. And a governmental entity per this law is any state or federal agency, local government, and then certain irrigation districts or water control districts that were formed under these specific statutes. And we passed rules shortly after that that then got into more detail around timelines, waivers, processes, things like this. One of the most detailed kind of changes that came out of the rules was an accuracy requirement for governmental entities. It only applied to that group. And it is just as a show here, and I'll refer to Appendix 1 and 2 for the statute and rules here if you'd like to review those in more detail. But this it basically said government entities had to provide data at this accuracy level and that they needed to come into compliance with this requirement by October of 1992. So at this point, all of these government entities who may or may not have been monitoring their water use really had 3 options. If they were ready and prepared, they could start reporting water use to us. They could request an extension of time to come into compliance, or they could request a waiver from this requirement completely, this accuracy component of the requirement. A number of different entities saw all 3 of these. And again, we haven't, as an agency, processed a waiver request in quite a while. But that is what we're going to be talking about from here on for the rest of the presentation. So fast forward 30 years, right? Last time people were supposed to be thinking about this coming into compliance was 1992. And really, there's only 3 reasons now that we would expect someone, or I should say a government entity, to seek this kind of waiver. First would be a new water right. It's possibly a new governmental entity. They just haven't had to come into compliance with something like this before. The other are those entities that have sought extensions that are still working to come into compliance, and it's very small and complicated reasons why, variety of reasons why that may still be the case. But then the third, in the case for the Burnt River Irrigation District, are cases where an existing water right may be reassigned or reissued in the name of a public, a government entity. And this, again, very rare. And in this case, I'll talk much more about Burnt River when we get to that agenda item in a future commission meeting. But there are other processes like district remapping that may result then in this administrative change that then makes this requirement applicable to those water rights. So now I'd like to discuss what really the commission is able to consider when determining whether or not to grant this waiver. And the rules are pretty clear and specific on this, that to qualify for a waiver, a governmental entity has to show 2 things, and both have to be shown. The first is that complying with the rules would cause economic hardship on the governmental entity. The other is that the information to be collected wouldn't really support health water management. And there's more, I want to go into each of those categories briefly and talk about what the rules say regarding those. So first, economic hardship. This, again, by definition means financial burden of extraordinary nature. That's the formal definition. And the rules point to these few examples here of maybe there's a huge number of new diversions. The cost of measuring and reporting exceeds the normal cost of measuring and reporting a similar volume of water. We, for example, issued a waiver in the early 90s for a drainage district that was in a tidally influenced area where the cost of gauging would have like been just 10 to 20 times the amount required for a more standard gauging operation. And then finally, if the cost of measuring and reporting would bankrupt the entity itself. So remember, both of these, the economic hardship as well as this next materially aid water management clause, need to be met. So this clause refers basically to the case where regulation is unlikely due to the absence of other water rights, or water is unlikely to, the use of that water is not likely to impact water availability functionally because the amount of water they're diverting is so small or de minimis. And then there's also clause C, another similar situation exists. We have not had a chance to interpret that clause, so we'll see what happens in our discussion. Yeah. So I want to this is my last slide for you today. This is just a quick overview of the process and bring us back to what you should expect at a future commission meeting. So if a waiver request comes in the door, as I mentioned, we have already received the waiver from Burnt River Irrigation District. We're working on, and this next step now is completeness review, working closely with Jason Street, our East Region manager, on this work, since he's very familiar with, he and his staff are very familiar with the district's work there. We will then be working on staff report to bring to you all for consideration by the commission. And then if you do approve the waiver, you would be issuing a special order that would document this decision. That is all I have to share with you today on this topic. Given the earlier conversation you all had, I welcome any suggestions or questions on how we can make the time between now and when this waiver comes to you meaningful for you all in your work.
Jan, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm familiar with the situation at Burnt River. What happened was the irrigation districts passed legislation back in the early 90s to remap the whole district. And so in Burnt River's situation, these were all tiny individual water users. And now under that statute, they're able to bring them all together into a unit. So all of a sudden measuring everyone in the whole district becomes a little difficult. So
Yeah.
I can see why this is needed, and I would certainly support it.
So wait a minute. I need another. So previously, individuals weren't subject to the measuring requirement. Now
Right.
they've combined and so would you not be able to measure then the total volume in one point?
No, they have individual diversions. Most districts have only one or two major diversions and they measure there. But because of the way that district was formed back in the last century, everybody has their own little individual delivery, and there wasn't a way to bring them all together until all of that mapping was done, figuring out what everybody had, and now finding a way to do the measurement in a more responsible manner.
So how will they do? I'm just trying to think. How many irrigators was this?
I'm sorry.
How many irrigators was this? How many people came together?
I'm not sure how many diversions they have or if your information shares that.
We will present that.
I was, yeah, I was.
We're not there yet.
I was going to, yeah, just operationary members of the commission. We wanted, today, we really did just want to brief you on this process, make sure you understood your roles, not in any way negating the importance of the questions you're asking. And in fact, yeah, we will be bringing all this information to you as part of that next,
Oh, I see.
okay, when we bring the decision to you. Now, that said, again, given the conversation you had this morning, I welcome any suggestions or requests on how we might help you prepare for this decision ahead of time so that you have some more space and time to consider it if you'd like.
This
Would
is,
you like to reframe your question?
yeah, this is exactly,
Yeah.
it's a great example of what I need.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, if this is something that we're gonna see again, because economic hardship or other sorts of things is going to ripple through the state, I want to understand the context. Because, ultimately that bar that has to be met of economic hardship on one hand versus impact on the other, that latter one's pretty important. And so if economic hardship or something has pushed these folks to come together in a way that gives an individual a chance to sort of no longer have to track what they're doing, it seems like it opens the door for some real problems within the district. And how does that stuff happen? If it's something, however, that's sort of ministerial and not a big problem that's coming, to me, this becomes a consent agenda item. Because we don't have the time to get into the nitty gritty of such a small thing. So I would love to know, is this something that we're gonna see more of around the state? Is it a trend?
Chair Reeves, Commissioner Mall. For the record, Ivan Gall, Division Administrator for the Field Services Division and Interim Deputy Director. As Commissioner Weinberg alluded to, most irrigation districts in the state are limited to one or a few large points of diversion on streams. Burnt River is unique. Ochoco Irrigation District is another district that has dozens of points of diversion throughout their district for various historical reasons. So I don't think this is going to become a statewide issue. If anything, folks have gone generally to consolidate points of diversion for various issues, fish screening, efficiencies, things like that.
Sure. Great. So in that regard, I didn't know the other question comes. So how does this benefit to the irrigators on one hand? Does that make it harder for people on the field to do the job, to look at the entire basin and impacts on the snake and all that sort of stuff? So,
And Chair Reeves, Commissioner Mall, it's an interesting situation, and I think at the case specific meeting there, Rachel and Jason Spreet, the East Region Manager, will be able to present information that will help answer that question. But in its simplest form, the Burnt River Irrigation Districts worked cooperatively with us for several decades in doing sort of a mass balance or water budget type equation, measuring mass water into the system, mass water out of the system, and we can check compliance there. There's also, in this particular case, very little regulation distribution that goes on from a water master perspective. So water users down there work cooperatively within the district. The district has staff that manages water within the district, and it's worked out very well and efficiently. So
that's awesome. So then the other final thing is, great. Is this an opportunity for us to grants and loans program or something to help some folks that are doing something that's really progressive, and perhaps a very small infusion of cash could help address perhaps the loss of information and applaud them for what they're doing. That's not a question to be answered, but I think it's the opportunity to maybe do that.
One thing related to your question, I think, is one of the things that the applicant has to show is that the information to be collected wouldn't materially aid water management. Because when I first see this, I'm like, yikes, really? We're just gonna wait for all time? But there are sideboards on this.
Yeah, and if the water, if the whole basin water budget is something that's being tracked, great, let's support that. We need that data for the bigger picture. Cool. When will this come?
Chair Reeves, Commissioner Mole, we are working alongside with our partners in water rights to ensure that without getting too far into the details, that the certificates are issued at a time when then if the commission decides to not grant this waiver, we can pull back certificates and reissue them in the name of the individuals, which would hamper the district's ability to then use in-district transfers, but the district has requested that we align these two processes so that they can keep their options open.
What's that mean?
I mean,
Years?
September.
But we think September, we were hesitant to commit to a date just
Okay.
because of the 160 certificates that have to be modified.
So
Thank you.
possibly
Significant.
November or.
Yeah. We're like 20. Yeah.
We'll be ready.
Thank you, Rachel and
Yeah.
Ivan both.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not think we have any requests for public comment. Is that right? But, no, I don't have a yellow form.
Usually not.
Yeah, geez.
Raquel, have you seen anything around public comment requests? Okay.
I'm just checking it real quick because there's no one in here.
I'll just make an observation here. You know how we discussed, we're not on any agenda item right now, so
No, we're just,
how we discussed as part of the commissioner experience here and how commissioners would like to be engaged. And we pointed out there's the opportunity to listen in on RAC meetings, and perhaps a commissioner could be identified to actually track a rulemaking process
right.
so that they are kind of personally knowledgeable about the issues and the whole process there, and they can bring that back and share that with the commission when the agenda item comes up. Commissioner Weinberg, as an excellent example, when you bring your knowledge forward to be able to share with the commission what this is all about and why this is an issue. And it really adds a dimension to the commission discussion, I think. And so thank you for contributing there.
Somewhat similar to legislative appointed committees. They have one or two legislators who take part in all of those various work groups so that that feedback does come back. It's been pretty effective.
So how are we doing on the scheduling of our next agenda item?
If we are ready to go, I will let them know, and Raquel will help us queue up a visual connection with.
Does anyone need a break before our next agenda item? I don't think this is.
Executive session.
Yeah, the executive session. I think we're good.
So Raquel, what's going on visually as far as cutting this off for executive
So
session?
we first need to announce that we're going into executive session pursuant to the scripts. that-
Are we ready to do that? I mean, I didn't know whether DOJ was ready yet.
We need to do that first,
Do what first?
announce that we're going into executive session.
I just wanted to make sure that the person with whom we're doing it is ready for that. So.
I believe they are.
It's going to require us to do some things, so
Okay.
that's why it's a whole.
All right, so I should go ahead
process.
and announce the executive session. Okay, the Oregon Water Resources Commission will now meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 20 sub H, which allows the commission to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session. except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to open session and welcome the audience back into the room.
You're
Ready
back,
to go?
Clyde.
All right, thank you. So the Water Resources Commission is back, has returned to regular public session after an executive session that was held pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 20 sub H. And we've come out of the executive session, and I'm now looking for a motion. Motion would be to authorize the Department of Justice to remove cases that name the Water Resources Commission as defendants in challenges to regulatory orders issued by the department regarding the Water Resources Department regarding calls for determined claim KA 622. Can I get a motion? So moved by Commissioner Clements, and a second.
A second.
Commissioner Kihara seconds. So I'll go ahead and do another voice. Commissioner Kihara,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements.
Yes.
Commissioner Singleton? Yes. Commissioner? Yes. Yes. Commissioner Weinberg, jeez, it's gonna take a while. Commissioner Reese votes yes, and the motion carries. I believe that is our last agenda item.
Chair Reeves, can we
Yes.
get one item on the record?
Sure.
Which is, my understanding is that Woody is excused
Oh, thank you.
for all votes
Yes,
that
that's
were
correct.
taken during this commission meeting.
Yeah, Commissioner Wolf was excused for this entire meeting, so he hasn't voted on any of our actual items. Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.